Good morning again. I keep thinking about this gospel, and it reminds me of a scene from Friends, if any of you ever watched it, where Joey's trying to guess thing, and he's like, a bird, a something, a ghost! And he just keeps saying it over and over again. And so I just think of them in the boat. What are they staring? It's a ghost! Okay. Gospel according to Joey. So Mike Breen, in his book Building Discipling Culture, talks about Monty Roberts, who's a horse trainer. His father was a horse trainer before him, and he grew up watching his dad train horses in the really traditional way, where you break the horse. You break the horse by tying the horse to a post and scaring it repeatedly with a blanket until the horse's spirit is broken. And then the master can now control the horse in any way that they want.
I'm sorry.
It's because no one's talking to you. That is the most traditional way to break a horse. And Monty was uncomfortable with this method of horse breaking that he had learned from his father. And so he studied how a wild stallion would join a herd and employed a new revolutionary model to horse training. So when a stallion wishes to join a herd, they would go to the lead mare, and the mare would then assume the challenge position at the stallion. The stallion would assume a submissive position. And then the mare would turn sideways, exposing her flank. The stallion would take a couple of steps forward. The mare would turn, challenge again. Stallion would go in submission position. The mare would then turn. And they would repeat this process until the horses are touching, side by side. Their flanks are touching. This is how a stallion then would be admitted into the herd. And he implored this with regular horse training. So Mike Breen says that in the same way, Jesus leads his disciples with this sort of mixture of challenge and invitation. In the Gospel of John, when he calls the disciples, we hear him say, "Come and see." This invitation is also a challenge. His dare then for them is to come closer, to learn and possibly be transformed by what is to follow. But again, there's a challenge with what comes in the gospel. What is the challenge that Jesus invites his disciples into? To be a follower. And inviting all of us into over the course of time in the Gospels. Take our story this morning of Peter walking on water. Jesus says, "Come." And Peter gets out of the boat and starts walking on water. It is an invitation and also a challenge, a dare. In this moment, Peter has a decision to make: to follow or to stay within the comforts of the boat, to accept Jesus' challenge of possible miracles that are to follow, or to stay within the safety and security of staying right where he is. Because a dare always comes with risks, right? And usually a little bit of fear. What are Peter's risks in this? What is it that he's afraid of? In this particular instance, drowning is probably one. So there's a physical risk to getting out of the boat, right? Looking like a fool might be another. Or even failing himself or failing Jesus, someone to whom he looks up to. What would you do? Do you ever thought about that? If you were in Peter's shoes and Jesus is like, "Come, get out of the boat," what do you think you would do? Now, I'm a really analytical person, and I often struggle with things like this, because I would be the person that'd be like, "Jesus, is it cold? How deep is it here? Are we talking 5 feet, 25 feet? What is your CPR certification like? Just in case this doesn't work out." This is something that I struggle with in my faith, that I think many of us do. That struggle of fear, of being confined by our own fears. In 1965, there were 3 marches from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, the state's capital, for African Americans in that state to exercise their constitutional right to vote. The first march took place on March 7th, and at the county line on that famous bridge, the marchers were met by state troopers who attacked them with clubs and tear gas. Standing on that bridge, alongside Dr. King and many other civil rights movement leaders, was our recently deceased Representative John Lewis. Standing 100 feet above the Alabama River, when they first saw the state troopers, Reverend Hosea Williams turns to John Lewis and asks him, "Can you swim?" The question is a very serious question in this moment. It's more than mere banter. It's more than like, look, we might have to go in the water. This question is laced with fear. It's laced with doubt and assessing the risks that they are about to face in the murky waters that lay ahead of them. If you're going to step forward, Mr. Lewis, if you're going to get out of this point of safety of the boat, are you prepared for what comes next? I'm pretty sure that I have said this to you before. Maybe just in like digital worship, so I'm going to say it again. But one of the most profound and important things that have ever been said to me is that sometimes you have to be uncomfortable to be in the right place. Sometimes you have to be uncomfortable to be in the right place. The challenge of the gospel is to love all and to love fiercely. This is what Jesus invites us and challenges us into, to shine a light into this world, to do the work of justice and peace, and to accept this challenge in the year 2020, where we sit right now in the midst of chaos, a pandemic, and even violence in our world that we see on the news. This can be nothing short of terrifying. Because living out this radical love of Jesus can sometimes be very uncomfortable and can take us to scary places. But remember, in order to walk on water, in order to experience these miracles of the gospel, you first have to get out of the boat. If John Lewis and others that were on that bridge were not willing to step out of their comfort, they would have never walked on water. They would have never secured safe voting rights for people in Alabama. They would have never gone on to continue to do the work of justice that we look back on them fondly for. This world would be a different place had people not had the courage to get out of their comfort zones, to work for this love of God. What do you think are things that God may be calling you to step out of your comfort zone and to follow Jesus into? And what are some of your fears that keep you in the boat? The same way that Jesus looked at Peter and said, "Come," is the same way that Jesus invites us and challenges us into this work of the gospel. The work of sharing the hope, sharing the love, and striving for peace and justice in the world. To continue the things that Jesus started. And we each face these challenges that fill us with fear. Fear of sinking, of failing. Fear of drowning. And see, there's a really important part. Remember, the story didn't just end where he got out of the water and he walked on water. What happened next? He sank. His fear overwhelmed him. And this is the really, really important part of this story. Because it's not just that Peter had the courage to get out of the boat, it's about what happened next. Jesus. Jesus grabbed his hand and pulled him back up. Because when we sink, that's when Jesus is there with that hand. On March 7th, they did not make it across the bridge into Montgomery County. They failed that day. They sank. But fear did not keep them under. They tried again and again. They were pulled up out of the water. And with the grace of God, that they had the courage to march forward again. Getting out of the boat is only step one. This invitation and this challenge that Jesus puts before us can sometimes be a real tall glass. And that's why the second step isn't even up to us. It's up to Jesus. That Jesus will always be there with that hand when we need it. One of my favorite Bible verses comes from 2 Timothy, chapter 2, verse 13. If we are unfaithful, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. Jesus will always show up, even in our doubt and our sinking and our fears and what feels like our failures. Jesus will stretch out his hand to try again, to lead us into these uncomfortable waters alongside him, to be our courage when we have lost it in ourselves. This is our Jesus, the one who gives us the strength and the faith to get out of the boat and to walk on water, and the helping hand to do it. But first, step one, you have to get out of the boat. Amen.